Well, it's Easter Sunday 2026. I'm going to go check out that church over there. It's a nice Sunday to ride around. So that's a nice church. People are going up to it. The demographic is rather old. It's an attractive small church. Doesn't hold a lot of people, but it's very attractive. Everybody's old. No young people there. In Santa Catarina and Vimeiro, they have young people and they sing and play guitars and stuff. But in some of the smaller villages, it's mostly older people. There are many happy birds. Here's an example of a smaller trad chapel. Quite nice. This is the last not rainy day for a while. It's going to start raining again. I would say rather. Well, hello, folks. I just completed my riding around looking at little churches in various villages, kind of surveying the Easter landscape. And I found that the demographic for religious people here in Catholic Portugal is old. There doesn't seem to be a lot of young people flocking to the church on the holiday. Of course, this is just an anecdotal, one-day experience. But I've read a few articles on the idea that people are flocking back to religion, and it doesn't seem to be true, actually. Whatever. If people flocked back to religion or not, it wouldn't bother me. What concerns me is just this deeply ingrained modern New Ageism, and there are so many better terms for it, but post-truth. There are different ways to talk about subjectivity and objectivity, and making judgments, collective action issues, all kinds of things like that. So many people talk about it so much more eloquently than I could, but it seems as if we have given up the ghost, not the Holy Ghost, the whole thing, because we just it's more than evangelicalism. It's more like I think therefore I am type of thing. Very solipsistic, self-centered, in certain, communities, in particular, I think wealthier people in Western countries and, U.S. Anglosphere type thing. Whereas here in my neighbors, they're not so caught up in themselves, They're much more connected with their close relationships with people in the village, people in the town, with doing what they do, getting on with their work, and it's just such a different perspective on things. They're extremely intelligent and educated, and they know what's going on in the world. There's nothing I can say that would surprise them. Yesterday we were drinking wine with our neighbor who makes wine. It's good wine, by the way. And everybody there, there's nothing I can say that sounds weird or shocks them. Whereas if I talk to some of my American friends, for one reason or another, depending on the person, they can become quite uncomfortable. Uh, maybe I'm talking outside the tribe, maybe I'm not the right religion, maybe I'm not the right political party, or they perceive me as such a person. Anyway, there's all kinds of deal breakers with these people, and you have to be very delicate to preface anything you're talking about very carefully, uh, you know, build the context, uh, explain to them that you're not judging. It's weird, you have to do this whole song and dance just to say something that's simply true, right? And then you have to giggle and laugh and agree to disagree, because it would be terrible if anyone were involved in a conversation where one party was trying to persuade the other party through rational argument, through uh, you know, intelligent discourse, using data, using science, whatever argument, lines of reasoning, or evidence you wanted to use. It would just be so uncomfortable to have to deal with that, Much easier to say, yeah, well, we're good friends. I disagree. That's just me. And so it's a kind of new agey evangelicalism where everything has to revolve around whatever you've latched onto. And in most cases, people don't really think too carefully about what they latch onto. They more or less just pick it up and parrot it, or it's more tied to their identity and their tribal identity, and therefore more stubborn. The most stubborn traditional people in my neighborhood, they're comfortable with their worldview and all that, but they're just not at all worried or concerned about my having a different perspective and so on, and being able to articulate it. It doesn't bother them. And they will talk to you about whatever, and they will say, well, I don't think the way you think, but I understand what you're saying, and here's what I think. And so they're very generous about sharing their ideas, thoughts, and feelings. And then you can say, okay, I understand you. We understand each other, right? And then you can continue the conversation into a more persuasive mode where you're trying to maybe convince your interlocutor that what you're saying is objectively true. And of course, you'll never know to 1,000% what is objectively true. We can always say things like that. But you're talking about things that are for real. Like I was just mentioning that Portugal is one of the countries in Europe that is providing support for the U.S. military war on Iran. And that's a thing, This country has a tremendous history during the Age of Discovery and all that kind of thing, colonialism and whatnot. And it doesn't matter the timelines, like we gave up slavery first or something like that. It's just like, yeah, I understand the history, but don't you wish your government wasn't supporting this particular action, military action in the Middle East? And almost everybody says they don't like it, And again, I think there's going to be a realignment of all kinds of perspectives and values. They were baked in for many reasons involving the meta crisis and poly crisis, but they're being accelerated by these wars that are completely wasteful and useless and stupid. And they're going to devastate the world order that we took for granted for 80 years or whatever. Um, and it's going to be a very radical change. And I don't think it's going to hurt us here that much because we'll get on with things one way or another. But I can see in the United States, I've read some articles about how climate change is costing the U.S. more. Well, it doesn't matter if the U.S. was the top emitter for a long time and China overtook them or whatever. What matters is that they helped create the problem, the United States, the system, whatever. I just finished editing another part of my capitalist cabinet of curiosities, part 10, about psychology and art and patriarchy and stuff like that. But they're going to pay more. The bigger you are, the harder you fall, as they say. And they have a lot of assets in the States. And people take a lot for granted in the United States. So when it starts to hurt on all levels, like it is now with this weather whiplashing and so on, I don't know if they have the right stuff to deal with it. I hope they do. But it seems to me, as I've said many times, they could just turn on each other, which would be terribly tragic. But in the meantime, before all of this is over, we have to put an end to that evil empire. We have to stop it from doing what it's doing. And I just don't see people over there rising up to do that. So whatever. Enjoy the end times or the resurrection or whatever post-truth you want to adopt. And I'll talk to you next time.